Thanks for coming and for being here for the presentation about OpenAerialMap. This was going to be co-presented between me and Kate. I recently just joined HOT to work on OpenStreetMap, and that was something that Kate has been working on before, and so we're kind of doing it together as we're continuing on to the development of OpenAerialMap. OpenAerialMap has been an idea around for many years already, probably back to 2006. In 2004, before, we had standard for standard web services like WMS, where to get imagery through a WMS, it used to take a long time. Usually WMS services were pretty slow, especially when we get imagery. And so actually Mikkel and I think a few other people from what was Mapping Hacks started thinking about a distributed way of having the same type of imagery, the same WMS, but in a distributed way. And so I think that was kind of the idea of how OpenAerialMap started. And then in 2007, I was in San Diego working with small UAVs for remote sensing. We had wildfires, serious wildfires in November of 2007, and suddenly we were flooded with all this imagery that we were getting from satellite providers, UAVs, big UAVs from NASA, and we needed a place to put it and make it available online to visualize on a map. And so that was another key point in the history of OpenAerialMap where we realized we really needed a way to collate imagery that is available and put it online for everyone to be able to access. In 2008, we came up with the name or the idea, OpenAerialMap. Sounds like OpenStreetMap, but for aerial imagery, satellite imagery. And so that's when we put together a wiki, started drafting some concepts, and from there we suddenly realized that it was a cool idea, but we didn't really have the resources to do it. It was aerial imagery, satellite imagery is much more expensive to store, to transfer than vector data or OpenStreetMap data. And so it didn't really start. It stayed as an idea until someone like Chris Schmidt and Skyler put it together into an iteration from the ideas that we put together in the wiki, and with some support from MapQuest, I think at that point, they put together some code. The same or similar code was used during the Haiti response and all the imagery that was gathered at that point. And that code has been posted and it's available on Github. And that is basically just a Django app that organizes imagery that comes from a digital processor. And that is the very basic of what OpenAerialMap will be, or it always was designed to be. And I'll let Kate continue and explain the theory and those ideas.
Yeah, so this is actually the GitHub repo that Cristiano was mentioning that Chris Schmidt had worked on with some MapQuest funding. The reason being that MapQuest was supporting OpenStreetMap, and imagery is one of the core ways to start mapping with OpenStreetMap. Where I really got involved in the idea of OpenAerialMap was after the Haiti earthquake. If you are interested in some of the background of the imagery that happened after that earthquake, there's a YouTube video that Jeff Johnson, John Crowley, and Skylar Earle gave, and it's really adamant about the fact of freely available imagery was core to creating map data in the response in Haiti. The World Bank released, had paid for a large area of Haiti to be imaged with aerial imagery and had released that under an open license. And that's really the first time that was seen. And so the idea of where to put this imagery so it's distributed and searchable really was something I became involved in. And then fast forward to 2013, we still needed imagery. And we needed somewhere to put it. If you look, there's my favorite example of why I need OpenAerialMap is, for those from the US, do you remember the last time the US government shut down because of budget issues? I was in rural Indonesia, and imagine explaining that we can't download freely available imagery from the USGS because their website's turned off because the US is shut down. And the reason I think the reason I make that point is imagery is too important to the mapping we do to leave it in the hands of a single government, a single nonprofit, or a single company. It needs to be broadly distributed, shareable, and open. And so this is actually our architecture diagram that we submitted as a grant application to the Humanitarian Innovation Fund that Willow Blue did. And we just were, well, just the idea that it needs to be open and distributed and global. I like to also describe the other side of it. Now there is a lot more satellite imagery. I've started referring to satellites as bunnies because there's more and more of them. Heck, the Planet Labs ones are almost rabbit-sized anyway. And so this is my first sort of introduction of, we have imagery too. So if you look back to 2006, you didn't see Digital Globe releasing imagery. Planet Labs didn't exist. Skybox didn't exist. Airbus wasn't releasing imagery. So it's changed drastically. And then Cristiano and others were using UAVs, but now, you know, they're freely available. When it is or cheaply available. When there's a disaster, people like to say, I'm going in there with my UAVs. The first time we really saw that was after Typhoon Haiyan. But where did that imagery go? People were willing to share it, but had nowhere to put it. Or at least nowhere easy to put it. There's certainly places you can share it. There was imagery of Tacloban after Typhoon Haiyan that was put up publicly. But it's not an easy, community, searchable, distributed place. So I did a grant application to the Humanitarian Innovation Fund at the end of 2013. And it essentially is an initial pilot grant to build the first node of this distributed system. So to have an API, have a catalog, and have that first node. And also have it so others can volunteer to host imagery as well. Because though the storage keeps getting cheaper and cheaper, there is still cost associated with it. And so this is actually an example of why we need OAM. Is this from IRC?
Yeah, well, from the Skype room just, I guess, a couple of days ago. And we just quickly realized that we're getting behind and suffering providing imagery, processing imagery, making imagery discoverable for our task, for mapping task on the tasking manager. And so this is really just a great example of why we need a place to find that imagery and put it online for use.
And the searchable catalog is what's really key, because there's lots of groups that are hosting imagery, but figuring out where it is difficult right now. And it's pretty amazing now that we have so many mappers that imagery is actually the limiting, processing of the imagery or discovering it is one of the limiting factors with volunteers. So we thought it's very important to define what OAM is, because when you say OpenAerialMap, that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. So we believe it's a web map and a tile service of the most recent, highest resolution open imagery. Key is open. There's lots of imagery you can go look at in Google Earth, for example, or on most commercial mapping applications, but it's not open. You can't you can't do things like do tracing off of that imagery freely. So having this open source is going to allow people to think of new ways to use imagery, make sure the derived data is free, and perhaps do things we haven't even thought of. It needs to be distributed. Like I said before, one organization can't be responsible for this. It has to be searchable. Having a great way to search through imagery is important. There's plenty of ways to search now, but you're going to a bunch of different websites. We want to incorporate standards so that things are interoperable. So, for example, we'll have our base set up of code and technology that's OpenAerialMap. But if another organization wants to hook in their image cache, which is in another format, but it serves TMS or WMS, they should be able to hook into OpenAerialMap so people can search that as well. It also needs to be distributable. In the ideal scenario, you should be able to download OpenAerialMap imagery and then go somewhere with it if you're going to be in an offline environment or low bandwidth. And I think that's going to be one of the longer term goals, but I think it's really, really important.
Also about distributable, like the fact that you can install OpenAerialMap on a laptop, for example, you would be able to collect imagery from UAVs and then post it on your local network and make it available to mappers that are on site without having to upload it to the internet. Maybe you don't have access to the internet, as we saw during the Nepal emergency. So make it so that it works also locally with a local endpoint for imagery to be accessed. I mean that's also one of the goals of the project.
Early on in hot stays in Indonesia, we were working with community groups where their plan for they would use JOSM and do mapping primarily with GPS, but then they would take their OpenStreetMap data by motorbike to go upload it. But the problem is there was no way for them to have imagery. They did things like, so it really inhibited getting them really excited, because once you've taught someone how to map with imagery, convincing them to go map every single building with a GPS is really difficult. It's more work, essentially. And we also thought it's important to say what OAM is not. Okay. So a lot of people want to learn about UAV data processing, but we have really sort of a sister project, OpenDroneMap, that's looking into that. It's also not meant to be a service for massive commercial use. As a community that's building a commons, that would be very difficult. That doesn't mean you can't take the open data available on OpenAerialMap and host it and provide a commercial service. It just means that the core services, similar to OpenStreetMap, we're not going to be able to host a ton of traffic for free. And it's also not for non-georeferenced imagery.
And for that, just want to touch on that, because many times we receive imagery from UAVs, and it's a nice mosaic, but we don't know where it is. There's no reference, there's no ground control points that we can use, so we can't really put it on a map. And so the idea is like, you process it, you give us ready geotips, ideally auto-rectified, and we put it on the map.
Do you want to speak to this one?
Well, that was just an example of the past days trying to search through the Digital Globe catalog, which is getting every day updated with new imagery. And that's really the problem, trying to go through all this imagery, all this overlapping imagery, cloud cover, all these other metadata that it's associated with all these scenes, and trying to find the one that we can really use. And so OAM is also trying to solve that through a catalog interface that reads directly the feed, for example, from Digital Globe that will put available during a disaster, and automatically sort based on what you're looking for, what you need for that specific. If you're looking for to map landslides, then you're going to specify your area based on a model that you define and want to look for imagery in this area, and that should be allowed into the web interface of the catalog.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of discussion about what's an open license in OpenAerialMap. And should it be any open license or but allow for filtering? For example, CC, a Creative Commons by attribution is an open license, though NextView really isn't. It allows, it's a US government license that allows us to digitize into OpenStreetMap, but you couldn't provide that for other uses. So what type of imagery do we want to accept? But also because the system is open source, if you do have, if someone was to have commercial imagery or non-open imagery, we're not going to host it for you, but you could potentially set up your own server. So it has uses beyond the base OpenAerialMap system. And so this is an example of what may be the catalog.
Yeah, well, in April, actually, we started with a first contract, part of this grant that we received from HIF, and we hired a development seed to start working on catalog interface and the API. And the good thing is that they were actually already working on a catalog, and this one is actually their Libra catalog, which indexes and allows to search for all the Landsat scenes available through the USGS repository hosted on Amazon at this point. Is that right?
And Google for older images.
And what?
Google Earth Engine for pre-2015 images.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So Libra is all open source, and at this point, this will be probably the structure in which we'll extend and build OpenAerialMap. So the idea is to create an easy-to-use web interface where you can set your filters, sliders, like time sliders, to create an extend in time that you need, cloud cover, other characteristics specified in the metadata of each data set, and so make it really easy for someone to search that. And then, once you find your data, then just click and get an endpoint that you can plug into your GIS, into your JAWSM or ID, and go with that. And the second part of OpenAerialMap is actually the processing part. So we receive imagery through upload API, for example, and then that imagery might be in a specific projection for wherever it was collected. So OpenAerialMap will take care of that, reprojecting it into tiles that are web-friendly projection, and then also create the tiles as much as possible, pre-seed those tiles, or provide an access to a way to request processing of those tiles if they're not already processed. So let's say you browse a map, you find an area where there's imagery that you find in the catalog, but that imagery is not processed, you only see the footprint, then you would request, please process this imagery, and OpenAerialMap will process and make tiles for you to use into the application. And tiles, it's made for making it faster for you to use into a web application. And that was the part that we want to implement as part of the nodes that will build OpenAerialMap. So, yeah.
There's certainly challenges, as we mentioned. Storage is still an issue because with imagery, it's large, especially if we're trying to store everything that's available. Bandwidth as well. If people are downloading lots of geotips, or even just heavy usage of a web map, there's certainly costs associated with that. And then just generally the computing to process all of it. And finally, licensing. There's more and more open imagery available, but there's still tons of commercial imagery that's not openly available. And we see it being more and more open more and more, but when there's a large disaster, there's a flood of imagery, but when there's a small scale disaster, there's no imagery. Or if you want to do preparedness mapping, one of the things that was important in Nepal was, in Chapman too, is a lot of mapping had already happened. Imagery is required make that happen. And a lot of times in OpenStreetMap right now, we're dependent on Bing Maps for that imagery. There was an email from someone from the Bangladesh government to the hot list a couple weeks ago because Bing had updated their imagery and they had fresher imagery, but there was a big 5-kilometer strip down the middle where now there was no longer high resolution imagery. And that was exactly where he had planned to do his project that week. So sort of, where'd the imagery go? Can we bring it back? By having it in an open system and having it, knowing it'll be available, it can be very important for people's projects. But it still has to be openly licensed. So we're thinking of a lot of different ideas. As Cristiano mentioned, the idea that you could run it on a laptop or other deployment schemes, making it easier to spin one up on Amazon, for example. If you could have a saved, if you had your saved AMI on Amazon, you could then say, okay, I want an OpenAerialMap instance. Would it be possible to do OAM on a stick? And then I'm sure there's many others, and maybe we'll hear some from you as well. I think also what's important is the non-humanitarian uses. I mean, in humanitarian, so HOT talks about imagery a lot, but that's not the only reason. There's a lot of interest for environmental analysis, doing disaster preparedness as well, and also non-OSM community mapping. There's plenty of data that doesn't belong in OpenStreetMap, but you still would need imagery to use it. And also resource rights is another possible example. And I think the other thing is when you make things open, people sometimes surprise you and do things you haven't even thought of. So with others, we just maybe don't even know yet. So here's the fun part for me. This is where I work now. This is the Cadasta Foundation. I've been working there 3 weeks, and one of the things that keeps coming up even more there is small, non-governmental organizations need imagery to do land rights mapping exercises. So it's very important to us that something like OpenAerialMap exists. So we're going to be supporting OpenAerialMap. We haven't figured out exactly what that means yet. I'm attending, there's an OpenAerialMap 2-day workshop on Sunday and Monday of this week. So I'll be attending and kind of determining what is needed. I'm of course in a position of a little bit of an advantage, being that I left HOT and now I'm with Cadasta, that I've been involved with OpenAerialMap for a couple of years. But I'm really excited to get together with a lot of different people and talk in person this week and figure out what we're going to do. So if you want to get involved, GitHub is a great starting point. We also have weekly meetings at 1800 UTC. We use Gitter for that, which you can get onto from GitHub. There's also a mailing list. And as of today, there is a brand new splash page at openaerialmap.org that Development Seed just put up. And as we build things out, we'll start to be the actual system there. So, thank you. Do you have anything to add?
No, I think we can take questions and go from there, discuss.
Chad.
I could see the accuracy in the of rectifying the imagery becoming a problem, and I'm wondering if you guys are going to sort of put some systems or procedures in place to make sure that data posted is as accurate as possible.
Yeah, that's a good question, and a concern that I raised in some of these meetings that we had in the past weeks. And the same point that I was saying before, we don't want known georeference imagery. But ideally we also want like good port directive height imagery, because that's how you make sure that Big Maps imagery aligns with whatever UAV imagery you collect. And so one of my recommendations for people who want to contribute to OpenAerialMap is really make sure you produce good quality imagery, or at least make sure you reference it to existing imagery that you know that it's good. Beyond that, I would think of computer algorithms that automatically go and do checks on imagery, or we can even use, if this imagery is used into OpenStreetMap, we can use whatever it's traced into OpenStreetMap to compare at different points in time. If you know what the error is with the previous imagery, that would obviously be a problem for OpenStreetMap, but it's a way to crowdsource that quality control, right? But at this point, other than trying to enforce or trying to recommend, please upload good imagery, please do your quality control before putting it out. I mean, we can definitely do it on large data sets that we get from public agencies, which we hope they're good anyway before they put it out. But yeah, I don't really have a complete answer to that.
Gotcha.
Well, one idea might be to, since Planet Labs is trying to open source this whole processing chain, they do have a processing step of actually doing sort of ground point like matching to Landsat 8.
Oh,
so we can do something similar, or take pieces of that code and like just, even if it just flags it saying like this doesn't look like Landsat 8, are you sure that this is right?
Especially if there's a stack of or a history stack of imagery, then you can really go through all of them and compare, right?
Yeah, we've also, I need to see what we can actually open source, but we also do have something that we're just internally to measure our own spatial accuracy. So, like, we're using NAPE as a ground for our stuff to see how accurate those come out. NAPE's more accurate than Landsat, but we could also see about open sourcing the code that just tests accuracy.
Yeah, because I think what's important is knowing the accuracy. I mean, we certainly worry about, there's some worry about non-accurate data, but for some people's use case, that's okay. Alex?
Have you guys thought about tracking imagery that is actually not available in an open license yet? Now with, disasters like Nepal happening, every time we get a little bit better in coordinating around tracking imagery and like getting imagery out there, but one of the main pain points remains to be to know who has what type of imagery, what's the exact extent of the imagery, what is the quality, way before we've even figured out how we get this imagery, right? To actually catalog it and know what we have possibly out there before we go and coordinate after going after the imagery and opening it up. Have you thought about like what OpenAerialMap can sort of help in that realm?
We've discussed making the catalog broader than just open images because of that exact reason.
And most importantly, to use standards that hopefully those providers use as well. So I'm surprised I haven't seen a CSW endpoint from, like, let's say Digital Globe or some of the other providers these days, but that would be, a first place to harvest, to pull out all those footprints, all that coverage, and the whole history of what they have. So.
Alyssa?
You kept saying we, describing who's participating in it?
It's a fairly diverse community.
Yeah.
HOT's the only group currently putting money behind it.
Yeah, HOT is leading, but like we're having this workshop on Sunday, and there's people from like Rob from Zevia, there's people like Chris from Planet. So we have been participating through these online meetings and interacting through these online meetings with different people from different communities, open source geospatial software communities, imagery providers, people from OpenStreetMap or from the UAV drone community interested to where they can put their data. So, but yeah, at this point, HOT is the company who got, or the organization that received a grant to work on this.
Right, but we're building a community, so yeah, there's the small we of HOT and then a broader we that's developing.
I can sort of speak to this. There was a birds of a feather meeting at Foster North America that a number of people attended that are interested in OpenAerialMap, but just like sharing imagery in general. Like Mark Porter from Amazon, just interested in how does open imagery get shared, even not specifically applied to HOT, but in sort of in a general sense. And then Seth Fitzsimmons from Stamen has a similar problem because there's elevation data that is, you know, it's the same raster data, same type of data, but how is this open imagery organized and shared, and just like, if we could just put imagery on an S3 bucket and then have it just immediately shared in an open network, that would benefit a lot of use cases, including this specific one.
Yeah, Hot definitely had our sort of selfish one use case, but building a community with many more use cases, we're going to be able to develop a platform so much more quickly and be so much more beneficial generally.
Other questions?
And if any of you just found out about this workshop now and it sounded exciting, like Christiana and I know.
We have room, and we definitely want people to participate, share their ideas. So.
Thank you.
Okay.